Transformation Ground Control. Your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 44. This is your podcast for all things related to digital transformation, the people, process, and technology side of change. I'm excited for another great episode today, but before we do that, Kyler, welcome back to the show, as always.
Thank you for having me.
So, good show we've got planned for you today. 3 segments per the usual, but different topics than we've covered in the past. We're going to start off the show today talking about emerging technologies in the global digital transformation space. So you've got a few sort of emerging trends and articles you've uncovered in your research over the last few days since our last episode. And so Kyler's going to walk us through some of that here in the first segment. And then later, we're going to bring on our first guest, who is Amanda Patton, who's a manager of strategy and transformation at Third Stage Consulting. And she's going to walk us through sort of a real-time, in-progress digital transformation case study. So this is not a completed case study where you look back with fondness of all the good and the bad and the ugly. It's more of, we're in the trenches right now with the client. These are the things that are going well. These are the things that are not going so well, or the things that we're trying to address. And so we'll have Amanda on a little bit later to talk through that case study with us. And just so you know, it's the company that we're going to talk through that we can't reveal by name is a mid-size consumer packaged goods company that's a manufacturer and a distribution company based in the United States, but with global sales and global appeal that's going through a digital transformation, and we're helping them through that transformation as we speak. So we're going to talk through some of those initial lessons learned from the trenches here later with Amanda. And then finally, we are going to have Adam Cheatham on the show again. He's been on the show a few times, including last week when we had our panel discussion about supply chain management. He was part of that panel, and he's been on, I think, several other times prior to that. So we'll have Adam Cheatham, who is also he's a director of strategy and transformation at Third Stage Consulting. He's going to be on talking about end of life for Great Plains within the Microsoft Dynamics universe, but we're going to sort of tie that back to just end of life and transitioning from legacy to current ERP systems in general, because it's not just Microsoft that's going through that challenge. Many vendors are sort of sunsetting out their products, so we're going to talk through some of that with Adam. So that's what to expect for today. As always, we have new episodes of the show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the audio podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon, Apple, Google, etc. So be sure to subscribe, check us out there as well. Share this episode with anyone you think might be interested. So before we get to our guest, though, Kyler, what are some of the emerging technology trends that you've been seeing in the global space here over the last few weeks?
Absolutely. My first finding is a group of small to medium-sized businesses in Korea that actually got together to do some innovation around medical devices and diagnostics. So basically what they can do with their technology is create medical device analytics that can diagnose over 90% of whatever the image is capturing. So for example, if it's a chest x-ray, they can capture up to 94% of different chest diseases in that industry. So completely AI-led machine learning, that type of trend. So I wanted to kind of get your feedback, Eric, on if you think those more vulnerable services such as kind of health diagnostics will move towards kind of more of a robotics type of strategy with, obviously a human oversight, which we talk a lot about in AI. But is that something you've seen kind of in the medical device community?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it in real-time practice yet, but I do think, to answer your question, the first part of your question, I do think that's where the industry is headed, and I think it's a good case study of how AI could be used in a pretty meaningful way that could benefit a lot of people in society. As scary as it may be, because you think about something like a heart condition or a life-threatening disease of sorts. Do you trust a robot or a computer or artificial intelligence to figure that stuff out for you? I would think longer term, it's got to as it's refined and improved over time, I would think you're going to have a higher success rate and a higher accuracy rate from AI than you would humans, because science is such a big, broad topic and so many disciplines and areas of specialty that I would think AI is going to be better suited for that. So it seems like a perfect fit. But then again, I'm not the one that is relying on a life or death situation. I'm not relying on AI for a life or death situation as we speak. So it's probably easier to say that than to actually move forward with that if you're in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your thoughts on a variety of companies coming together to create this innovation? Usually with technology, we see those types of almost secretive type of strategies. Have you ever seen especially our APAC area, a lot of times that's where technology is born. Have you ever seen kind of a group come together in this way to support this type of innovation?
I've seen in the academic world, like in universities and I think in university technology and health settings, there's been other instances. I can't point to any specific ones off memory, but I do think that I've heard of that on the university setting. I haven't necessarily heard of for-profits. Are these for-profits? I missed the first part of that, or maybe you didn't say. But are these for-profit organizations that are?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know if they're for-profit or if it's just a pre-market product at this point that they're testing. But it sounds like they're for-profit businesses.
Yeah.
So.
And I think like the even just more recently, and we've talked about it on the show too, like the COVID vaccine. I believe that was done through partnerships that were different drug companies and obviously partnering with different governments throughout the world to formulate that vaccine in a record time. So I think that might be another more recent example as well. So it seems like it's not totally uncommon to have that sort of co-opetition or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and COVID is a great example too of kind of where you could have opportunities for AI, especially when it comes to things like testing, and we've seen like temperature checks go to technology based for companies and things like that to try and stop the spread of COVID-19. So I think we'll see a lot more of that innovation in the medical industry. We'll see a lot more of that innovation in the medical industry is clean energy. And especially after our global sustainability and climate change conference this week with so many different world leaders, I wanted to ask you about kind of energy innovation because it sounds really good, but a lot of energy innovation because it sounds really good, but a lot of and saying, hey, all of this is great, but you have to remember where we get the raw materials, specifically here in the U.S. President Biden has said that he wants half of cars to all be run off of clean energy by 2030. And a lot of that has been kind of flagged as difficulties because things like ion lithium batteries, solar panels, those types of things are still outsourced. So I wonder from, a U.S. perspective, if you could give us some feedback on what you think that is going to look like logistically in promoting clean energy.
Yeah, it's a good question and a good point. I think that there's probably going to be more vertical integration in that clean energy supply chain than maybe you've seen in other industries. And I think in general, I think we may have talked about it in this podcast before, and I've definitely talked about it in some of my YouTube videos, kind of looking at predictions and trends for supply chain management in general. That vertical integration, I think, is becoming more common as a mechanism to survive and to mitigate the risk of current supply chain. So in other words, if you own the supply chain, that's different than, or you have more control, or you can exert more control than if you are dependent on a third party that where you're sort of prioritized just as you would be any other customer, which may or may not be enough for you to get timely materials. So I think that vertical integration, which would mean that these clean energy companies are probably going to have to buy, for example, the battery companies and whatnot. And I think some of the if I remember correctly, I thought there was a U.S. car company, I want to say it was GM or someone like that, General Motors or one of the big U.S. auto manufacturers. I think they bought a battery manufacturer a while back, even before some of these supply chain issues started. So I think if I remember correctly, I think there's some clean car companies that are already starting to do that. But I think in general, that industry is probably going to be dependent on some vertical integration to begin with, at least until the market is established, and then you start to get other third-party players that can jump in and start to create niches and try to outperform, that vertically integrated supply chain and whatnot. But it's hard to say, but that would seem to make sense from that perspective.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And so do you think with the current climate of supply chain shortages, challenges, broken supply chains, in knowing specifically that's with exports, we see it back up at our ports. We're really struggling with global wide shipping. Do you think that's something that will continue to be a main theme as we move towards cleaner products or businesses, or do we now have a continent that we're on?
Yeah, that's where we are right now. Just looking in the short term, I think that's where a lot of companies are going worldwide. They're trying to reshore more of their raw materials and pieces of their supply chain. In fact, that is something I know we talked about in last week's panel discussion about supply chain management. And for those listening, the last episode, which was episode number 43, was all devoted to supply chain management. So we had 3 different segments on different supply chain management topics, including the middle segment. Kind of the main segment was focused on a panel discussion, and that is something that came up. But I think it's sort of like the pendulum swinging, through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, the pendulum was swinging clearly toward globalization and global supply chains. But even before COVID, but now especially with COVID, the pendulum's sort of starting to swing back. I don't think it'll, I don't know that we'll necessarily get back to where, each country is producing, all of its own materials, because first of all, I don't think that's possible, because not every country has the resources to produce everything they need in their supply chains. But all things being equal, that I think you're starting to see more companies that are sort of rethinking the focus on lower cost at the expense of not having control over quality or timeliness or flexibility of the supply chain. I think companies are willing to pay a little bit more in their supply chains, even if onshoring is a more expensive option. That still may be the best long-term answer if it gets provides that flexibility and speed that organizations are missing right now in their supply chains.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely something that it's hard to be a company and held to those expectations of, being able to be a sustainable company, and maybe as much as you want to, but it's difficult to really kind of look there. So maybe a slower evolution on that side than fast. And that's something that, we'll continue to watch for sure, because it's right up in there in a initiative or a strategy from our government, specifically here in the U.S., and understanding how businesses are able to actually implement that for sure. So one of the other things I found interesting is that Google just recently moved a lot of its operations to the Australian market, calling it the Silicon Valley of the Southern Hemisphere. And then I wanted to get your reaction to that, knowing that Australia is actually the first country, to actually make those bigger tech giants pay for utilizing their search results. So I wanted to see kind of what your reaction was to that, to seeing, American-based businesses moving a substantial amount of their operations or resources overseas.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as a patriotic American, I guess you'd say, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are patriotic to their own home countries. You want to see the jobs and the technology and the opportunities stay in your country. But then again, I'm all about, wherever it makes sense to have your operations, you should do, because that's going to help the company and, the home country better in the long term anyway. What kind of, is it more like, did they say what kind of operations are moving? I'm just curious more. And this is the consultant me that can't give you a straight answer without asking you a bunch of questions.
740 million in US dollars over the next year. So that basically is creating 6,000 jobs and 28,000 overall support positions within the Sydney economy. So a big move for that Australian piece. And and then moving to, I think, just globalize their overall business. I think just globalize their overall business from a hub here in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, they are a global company, and obviously the world relies on Google, so it's not surprising that you would have these sort of global operations and global expansion of footprints. So it is interesting, though, that you see these different countries. Like I think for a while, Ireland has been sort of a tech hub of within Europe, and you get these different tech hubs throughout the world. I think that just further advances technology in general, and yeah, so I think it's inevitable, and it's probably a good thing longer term to see that global footprint expand.
Yeah, regulating tech. It's something that we really haven't been able to kind of pinpoint here over in the U.S. But like, for example, the competition regulator over there, which is similar to our monopoly legislations here in overall competition in the marketplace, called for Google to install a choice screen on their smartphone. So basically that you would, as a user, would be able to choose a different browsing system. And again, requiring those big technology firms, including requiring those big Google and Facebook, to pay for news content on their platform, and really kind of reinvesting that in the economy. Audience. And if you email me your feedback at kyler.cheatham@thirdstage-consulting.com, we'll look at it on our next episode next week, if you have any thoughts on that, because we'd love to hear from our global audience.
Yeah, you trigger a couple interesting thoughts, though. I mean, or a memory jogger, I suppose, where I hadn't thought of it from the perspective of regulations and data privacy and things that Google and other big tech companies are having to deal with. They're dealing with a increasing regulatory scrutiny in the U.S., where I think there's been more lax rules for those big tech companies. They're starting to tighten up those regulations. So I guess from that perspective, you think the benefit of having most of your operations in the U.S. or having that sort of U.S. protection under the legal system, with that somewhat going away, that takes away that advantage of being in the U.S. So I could see that being a potential catalyst for driving some of that expansion of their operations into other countries as well.
Yeah, and I would have loved to be kind of a fly on the wall for that negotiation, right? Saying, we're going to bring and stimulate jobs within your overall economy, and Australia saying, well, you're still going to need to pay for, on news sites and things like that. It would have been really interesting, because we really haven't, started or pioneered kind of those negotiations here in the U.S., because it's always been non-censored. But not that Australia is censoring, but there's so much as saying that you do need to kind of pay to play here. So
yeah, and that is part of the risk they're facing in the U.S. is the censoring. They're going to lose. I mean, it looks like they may lose some of the legal liability protection they had by not providing actual editorial content as they had in the past. But now that they are taking a more active role in censoring information that they deem to be inappropriate, that's causing the U.S. to say, okay, well then you're not going to get those protections anymore. And so yeah, I could see that would make sense that they'd want to rethink their dependency on the U.S. for their operations and protection, and really looking more internationally for sure.
absolutely. Well, again, we'll visit our Brisbane office over in Australia in order to follow this very hot story. So stay tuned.
That is, as long as Google or YouTube don't censor this video because we're talking about it. I hope hopefully this video doesn't get taken down because we're just talking about them. All kidding aside, though, that sounds good. Well, thanks for that update on the news in the space right now. That's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I have a few Thanksgiving themed. So turkey costs are up over 30% from last year, and they are 20% harder to find. So if you are short on turkey, you might have to, do something else for Thanksgiving, and what that looks like. So knowing that those supply chains are backed up, or meatflation, as we like to call it here, was released by the U.S. Department of Agriculture on Monday, saying how difficult it is to truly get a turkey. It's it's up 150 per pound, and we haven't seen that increase since the 90s. And economists also say that this will be the most expensive Thanksgiving we've ever seen here in the U.S. because of those inflation prices. So I really want you to solve this bottleneck, Eric, and tell us how we could. I really want you to solve the potentially one yet.
Well, first of all, I think it's crazy that the supply chain issues and inflation, which are two things that are top of mind for a lot of the world right now, in addition to COVID and a number of other factors. But it's surprising to me that even turkeys are affected. That's something that you would think, how hard can it be? The turkeys are, I would presume, primarily grown or harvested locally. So it's not like we're relying on ships to bring the turkeys over or the meat over from other countries. I don't think, but maybe we're more dependent on that than I realized on the global scale. But I think that the easy answer, or not the easy answers, but the common answers that we talked about last week about just the supply chain in general probably apply here, like making sure that we're localizing as much of that turkey production as we can. So in other words, we may not be shipping coast to coast or throughout the country as much. It might be that we rely on more local or regionalized farmers to provide that product, but still doesn't fix the fact that you still have to get the turkeys from the farm to wherever it's going. Even if it's a shorter distance, you still have to do something to get it there. So I don't know if it's back to the farmers providing more of the transportation and logistics that maybe they haven't had to in the past, or relying on more non-conventional ways of getting shipping and parcels and packaging and all that stuff shipped to wherever it needs to go. But those are just some of the things that come to mind, is primarily just moving everything closer to where the end product needs to get to in the case of these turkeys.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to come to my house, I saw about 30 turkeys, and so maybe we can help with that. But so lastly, Eric, on our Thanksgiving fun, last year we wrote a blog on if software vendor. We have 3 of them. We have the turkey, we have the potatoes, and we have the cranberries. So I want you to try and see if you can guess what vendor was the turkey, the potatoes, and the cranberries.
I'd say the turkey would be. I'm going to go with SAP on that one for a number of reasons. S4HANA, I don't know if that was, from your reaction, doesn't look like that was the real answer in the blog. But I'm just going to say that because it's the biggest software vendor out there. Sometimes it's bloated, makes you feel, sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it's really expensive, just like turkeys, as we just talked about. And sometimes, to be honest, sometimes SAP as an organization can be a bunch of turkeys. The way they sell their software and sort of oversell the capabilities and all that stuff. When it's a half-baked turkey, I would say, with S4HANA. So I'd pick on SAP for the turkey, the good and the bad of turkey.
Yeah, well, you were close. It is another big one. If you're not SAP, you are
Oracle.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So Oracle was the turkey. Very, very good.
So mashed potatoes, though. So to me, like, mashed potatoes are delicious. So I don't necessarily have a favorite software vendor, but one that people really like. I guess I'd probably go with NetSuite as the mashed potatoes, which is an Oracle product.
The hearty potatoes, think of like a very robust system, but can also be flexible. Right?
Oh yeah. Microsoft Dynamics.
Ding ding ding.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's actually a good one. And again, it's like it is a favorite as far. I wouldn't say favorite, but it just ranked highest on our top 10. I personally don't really care, who's on top or not. But I'm sorry to all the vendors out there who do care deeply who's on top. But I really don't. It's just more a matter of what our clients like and just the strengths and weaknesses that we see in the market. But having said that, I think that is a good fit for Microsoft, and that flexibility to eat too much of it or to change it too much. Like you can do a lot with mashed potatoes that maybe you shouldn't. You could add stuff to it that you may not want to. That's a lot like Microsoft Dynamics too. People they take advantage or abuse the flexibility that the product offers, and they make things more difficult for themselves oftentimes.
if you're thinking about something that seems like complex, but it's kind of an outlier, kind of like the cool, hip.
Is it like an Odoo or something like that? Is that it? Like the open source, the cool, trendy open source technology?
Yes! Open source cranberries. So, and Thanksgiving, but we're excited to celebrate the holiday. And here in the U.S., it's all about gratitude, and we truly are grateful for you listening and engaging with our content here. So, and speaking of gratitude, we have an awesome interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda Patton is her name, and she'll be on the show talking about a consumer packaged good company that is a client of ours that we've helped through the software evaluation. We helped them pick the software. Now we're helping them implement the technology, and we're right in the throes of the implementation now. We're going to talk about the lessons learned from the trenches of that transformation. So we're going to bring on Amanda to talk through that and her experience so far. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be back with that interview. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Bad to the bone.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, your podcast for all things digital transformation. This is episode number 44, and you can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as all the audio podcast platforms, whichever one you might be listening to. So I'm excited for our next guest, Amanda Patton, who is a manager of strategy and transformation at Third Stage. I invited her on the show. She's actually been on the show in the past. I think it was episode number 2 or 3. It was really early on. She was on early this year in one of the first episodes of Transformation Ground Control. And she's back to talk about another case study this time. This one is a transformation in progress. We're in the middle of it right now. And we wanted to talk to her about what are some of the things she's experiencing right now, some of the lessons, some of the things that are going well, some of the things that aren't going so well, and what can we take away from that. So we wanted to have her on the show for that reason. And just a fun fact, Kyler, I don't know if you know this or not, but Amanda is not only one of our great talented team members, but it's also the first song on the album Third Stage that I got the idea for the name for the company Third Stage. So actually that's it right behind me. If you're watching the video, you can see the album cover right over my shoulder. That is the album from Boston called Third Stage, and the first song on it is called Amanda. So it's only fitting that we would have an Amanda on the show and on our team. It kind of fits. So all that being said, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, and you've been on the podcast before, but it's been a while. You were on one of the early episodes of Transformation Ground Control, so it's good to have you back on here.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, and you're going to talk about a different project, I believe, this time than what we talked about before, or maybe it was the same project. Was it?
It feels like
I don't remember.
I don't know.
Several months ago, so now I don't remember. But either case, a lot has changed. If it was the same project we talked about before. This is a project that you've been working on for some time with us. But
Yes.
I guess before we start asking about the client and a little bit about the company, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, just a little bit about your background and what you do at Third Stage in general.
Okay. Sure. Well, let's see. I've been around the software world, I guess, for the past 8 to 10 years in different capacities. Was with IFS, so on the vendor side, and did global analyst relations, was an industry manager, and the strategic alliances lead. And so over the years did different roles, which was really cool because I got to see the whole entire process from different vantage points and learned a lot just from, selection and, how customers select and how they implement and what that all looks like. So it's pretty cool to have kind of a mixed bag of skill sets from, in that regard. And then at third stage, we tend to kind of wear multiple hats around here and work on really cool collaborative teams, and people bring, a diverse set of skill sets. And the majority of the projects that I'm on, I'm really doing project management, overall, do some analysis and a lot of, that kind of thing, from organizational readiness and the selection process and that kind of thing. But really, project management is kind of my go-to here lately, especially on the last few projects I've been on.
Great. So you'll have a unique perspective that a lot of us don't have, just having worked for a software vendor in the past, and you've sort of been on the other side of the table. And it'll be interesting to get your perspectives as we talk here today, sort of, what that contrast is, between being on this side versus the vendor side, and understanding those challenges in a different way, having been on that side.
Yes.
Sure.
I know all their secrets. So
right, the dirty little secrets of
Yes.
being a vendor.
yes.
So tell us a little bit about this client. I know we can't mention him by name, obviously, for confidentiality purposes, but just tell us a little bit, at a high level, kind of what is the lay of the land as far as the company itself. What do they do? How big are they? All that good stuff.
Right. So they're consumer goods, as you have mentioned, a mature, established company, mid-size enterprise, and they sell direct to consumer and a lot of business to business as well. I don't know. I can't go into too much more detail, I guess, without revealing, identities. So yeah, that's pretty much the overview.
Okay. And they're very well established, as in they've been around for centuries,
Exactly.
not
Yes.
10 or 20 years, but hundreds
Very
of years.
mature. Very, very mature.
Yeah, which is
and
can
I'll
be a
talk
good thing and a bad thing.
exactly, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that more as we get into the interview. But as you can imagine, there's just a lot of legacy, old processes, old technologies, old ways of doing things, and also the economy and the way that we do business and the way that consumers behave and the way that they purchase things, and just that whole entire world has shifted. And so there's a lot of change going on, within this company, just because of all of the evolutions they've gone through. So, and then with COVID, that's like a whole nother, fast tracked evolution. So,
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about the transformation itself that they're going through as an organization, and sort of where are they in that journey? Maybe start from, how we started working with them and kind of leading up to where we are today. How would you sort of summarize that journey so far?
So they had gotten to the point a lot of companies get to, where the technology they had and the processes they had were not only not ideal, but were starting to actually hold them back, right? And so they came to us with, we just need help, right? We need help understanding what we don't know, what's available to us, looking at our current state, comparing it against other manufacturers, in similar, industries and size. And so that's really where it started. And we began with them with an organizational readiness assessment to really understand where they are around, technology, process, change. This is a really, really old system, legacy, green screen, everything's really manual. And it's almost like if you haven't been there for a long time and don't know your head, it would be really, really hard to come in off the street and use the technology to be able to do your job. And so, that causes issues with, accuracy, training, all of that kind of thing. Especially as you bring kind of in a younger, more tech savvy workforce, people expect for their systems at work to reflect, the way we do things in our regular lives, using our phones and that kind of thing. So there was just a huge disconnect between what they have and what they want to have. It started the selection process, right, where we go out and we start that, of course, with the process workshops, where it's this, painstaking but really cool and exciting exploration with the teams across, sales, customer service, production, across all the big functional areas, taking us step by step. What exactly do you do? And really laying out that in the way of, process maps and that, which helps us to really understand what are the requirements, what is current state, not what you want people to think it is, but what it actually is. And then what's future state, right? Where are we going? Where do we want to be? And what do we need from a process and technology perspective to be able to get there? And then running the actual selection, right? Doing analysis on all of the requirements and doing the demonstrations and having the customer weigh in on scoring those demonstrations. And then having two top vendors. Sometimes it's more, but in this case it was two. And they basically have a showdown and compete for the business. And then we had a winner, of course. And then now we are deep into the implementation, right? The design phase. We're getting ready to do user acceptance testing. And we're a couple months from go live. So we're pretty well into the project now.
Nice. Yeah, very, very interesting. It's sort of like getting a lay of the land and understanding who they are and what they're trying to be in the future, so that we can figure out what system or systems would be the best fit for them.
Exactly.
So that was a good overview of sort of where they are in the process, what sort of triggered or initiated this whole transformation. What type of technology, we try to be pretty vendor agnostic. We are vendor agnostic as an organization, but in these discussions and podcasts, we try to be fairly vendor agnostic and not, bash any one vendor or be overly positive about any vendors in general. But what can you tell us about the type of solution that we ended up recommending and that they ended up implementing?
Yes, I'm not going to get too specific, but I will just say, it's a solution that's built for manufacturing, right? And so you have all of the functionality that you would expect for that type of company, and all the bells and whistles that you would expect to find for a company who manufactures. So, a lot of manufacturers tend to be on premise, and there's been a huge shift, right? Or there is, I guess we're kind of in it now, where, people are trying to modernize their systems and people are going to the cloud, and there's all these big questions, and there's a lot of, it's hard to leave behind all of the things that they're kind of used to. And so it was even a huge change management component, I guess, or the beginnings of it, where it's such the delta is so massive between green screen, hotkeys and all the things that people do and have been doing forever, to this modern, where things are more icons, and it's just very different, right? So I think it was off-putting, but also exciting for them. But the vendors we pulled in obviously were based on who can satisfy the requirements. So for them, it was pretty much all manufacturing centric technologies solutions.
Right. So they end up with a sort of a tier 2 industry focused solution, rather than, it wasn't an SAP or an Oracle or a Microsoft, sort of one of those big broad vendors. It was more of a focused solution.
Right. And I think that would have been over engineered for them, given their size and what they're trying to do anyway. So yeah.
Okay. So in the process so far, I guess where in the implementation are we right now in helping them? So what phase of the overall implementation, or kind of what's next? What are some of the immediate milestones we have coming up?
So last week, actually, we just finished the end-to-end, just the full, end-to-end. And we're getting into now preparing for UAT. And really the specifics of, writing all the scripts for the user acceptance testing, make sure it's not boilerplate, right? That we have really specific nuances to this particular client, understanding that they do have a secret sauce. They do have ways they do things that differentiate them from their competitors. And so, getting into looking at what happened in the end-to-end. what's working, what's not. Massive decades upon decades worth of data is being continually deduped and scrubbed and reformatted and just all of that, right? And so a lot of that's getting moved over from pilot to production. There's just a lot of those types of things as we prepare to be able to test. But that's where we are now, right? Deep preparation for user acceptance testing.
Okay. Yeah. So this is where a lot of the rubber meets the road, and a lot of the challenges and hiccups and all that sort of stuff starts to get exposed. Really, is during that end-to-end process design, and then the user acceptance testing, as you mentioned. What are some of the challenges that we've seen so far? Just kind of looking at where we are in the journey with them right now. What are some of the biggest challenges we're facing now, or that we faced so far leading up to now?
Well, like I said earlier, and this continues to just be a theme, it's just a massive change, right? Legacy green screen, essentially very manual, institutional knowledge kind of thing, and very you've got to go in and mine for data and like build custom report. It's not the way we're used to, where you can just go query for what you want. There's just a lot of I think one of the biggest challenges is like not knowing what they don't know. And with each iteration of these design and configuration sessions and these conversations, and then all of the sidebar conversations happening around business processes and like what needs to change and why does it need to change, and does everyone agree that it needs to change, and also not operating in their own little silos, but making sure that everyone had this broad view across all the teams of like, if we make this change, this is going to impact this over here. What does that mean from a process perspective, technology perspective? So I think that's one of the huge challenges, is just you're asking an entire corporation to recalibrate and shift perspective individually and collectively, which is, it's a lot to ask. There's also the stress of learning an entirely new system, right? That looks nothing like what you're used to. If you're going from one modern ERP to another, it's probably not that big of an adjustment, right? But when you're going from, legacy to what they're going to be using, it's been huge. We've also had a lot of, issues with the vendor that's caused heartburn. Some of these things can't really be predicted. It just depends on who the team is, the consultants that are deployed from the vendor side, the project manager, their product roadmap, what changes they have going on behind the scenes. And so making sure that, we as the neutral party, right, in the overall project, that we are advocating for the customer, that we are kind of giving the vendor a really hard time sometimes when they're not doing what they said they were going to do. In the sales cycle, it was said like this is what we're actually seeing. What's the deal? Creating mitigation plans, asking for, rebates or things like that. Just making sure, because look, the customer, they have a full-time job to be doing, for one thing. They have a day job to like keep the company running. They also now have a part to full-time, depending on their role in the project, on this implementation. The last thing they could be working 60, 80 hours a week for a period of time to get this thing implemented, depending on their involvement. The last thing they have time to do or the capacity to do is go chase down the, things that the vendor said that aren't necessarily happening the way they should be. So it's really good to have a neutral party, because like we've talked about before, at some point we roll off of these projects. This is a long-term relationship between the client and the vendor. And so I am always working to make them, get them to communicate with each other. And I will be, the bad cop or whatever. I'm happy to do that. But to have that communication, to know who to escalate to, who do I go to? Where do I submit a ticket? How do I make sure that this has been, resolved, those kinds of things. And there are just so many people involved that can get really, really chaotic very quickly. So, I think that's one of the main things right now.
All right, great stuff. Thanks, Amanda. We're going to take a quick break, and I've got a bunch more questions for you when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Relax, don't do it when you want to go to it. Relax, don't do it.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling and I'm here with Amanda Patton. We're talking about a case study of a manufacturer that's going through a digital transformation. So let's jump right back into the conversation. So you and I were talking before we went live here. We were talking about how we're working with the vendor's direct services group. So in other words, we're not using a third-party VAR or a system integrator. This is actually the vendor itself providing the technical resources to manage the implementation, which in theory, you'd think that should be an easier, more smooth sailing process because you're dealing directly with the vendor. You know, we're getting resources straight from the vendor. Who better to know the product than the vendor themselves? And so in theory, it should be a easier process, or you should in theory have better resources because of that. Now, but that hasn't necessarily been the case, has it? I mean, there's been some challenges that we do see often, but we don't see them with all of our implementations. You and I were talking about another implementation you're involved with where it's like just a totally different experience. Right. What are some of the challenges with the vendor? Like, what are some examples of challenges we've run into with the vendor themselves?
So, to your point, every single project is completely unique, right? It's because it deals with human beings and you know, different technologies, different deployment teams, and so every single one is completely different. And I was under the same impression as well, because you would think that, you know, people who are employees of the vendor, that would be better, right? It would be closer to the source instead of having a bunch of, you know, outsourced things. But, you know, what's ended up happening is that there's just a lot of disjointed disorganization, you know, miscommunication. A lot the vendor has going on behind their own scenes has caused a lot of pain for the customer. There are a lot of upgrades and, you know, just a lot going on with their product roadmap. Let me just say that. And so those changes are causing glitches and delays and confusion for the process of the implementation for the client, right? Because you know how everything is, you know, you've got this critical path, you've got all these dependencies. And so if this thing gets messed up, well, now we've got to rework all of, you know, if somebody, that's one of the issues we've had with this vendor is that they've laid things out and then those things are continually changing. It's like chasing a moving target. And it's really difficult when, like I said, you've got people over here trying to learn a new system. They're trying to write new processes for future state of their company. They're trying to work their day jobs. and their schedules are really full, right? And so it's just caused a lot of extra, you know, heartburn. Another thing too, I don't know if you've ever, you know, called customer service somewhere and you've been transferred 17 times and you've had to tell your story over every single time. Right. Even though the person says like, yeah, I'm going to put this in the notes. That has sort of been the experience for the customer as well, right? Even though you have these are, you know, employees of the vendors. It's not like it's a new outsourced team or some third party team. This is all, you know, people who work for the vendor. But every time they come on to talk about building out a new module or a new, you know, component, we've had quite a few experiences where the cloud environment hasn't been spun up yet, right? Oh, we thought you were on-prem. Sorry, we need 2 weeks now to spin up the cloud environment so we can do this training and this configuration, things like that. We don't have 2 weeks, right? also that pushes so many other things back now. And then just kind of the thing where you get on the phone and you expect your if you're the client, you expect the vendor to know who you are, what you do, how big you are, where you're located, your whole story, and the fact that you're on the cloud and that you're using this product and that, and that just has been missing. Right? It's almost like they have to tell their story from the beginning every single time. And that obviously hurts confidence. It makes people feel worried. It makes people feel like, is this implementation going to go well? What's going to happen on go live? It doesn't seem like they're really paying attention to what we want and what we need. So that's been a huge frustration. And like I said, you have, I would say, I'm trying to remember from the organizational readiness assessment, I think it was 89, 90% of the people who work for this company have never been through an ERP implementation ever. So this process, the methodology, all the meetings, all the acronyms, all the just the language, everything about it is completely foreign, right? And so people are already a little bit, just worried and insecure. It's a new experience for them. I think that's completely normal. And it doesn't help when the vendor shows up and seems like they don't know what's going on, right? It's really frustrating. So,
yeah. Now you had mentioned too, you were talking a few minutes ago about just now you were talking about the different modules, you setting up different modules and all that goes into that. So you've got so many dimensions of things to think about from a technology or a software perspective here. You have the different modules you're going to use, whether it's cloud or on-prem, and a lot of things are specific to that solution. But then there's also, in this case, and in many cases with a lot of our clients, there's third-party bolt-ons that go along with that to fill in some of the voids with the product roadmap, to your point earlier.
right.
If this product doesn't have certain functionality, we don't have it, but here's a third-party option that could sort of fill that gap. There's been issues with that as well, have there not? Or what are some of those challenges with those third-party apps and how it all sort of comes together?
Yes. Lack of communication, again, finding out at this stage in the process that things that were bought, in the sales process now, oh, well, we're sunsetting that. We're coming out with this new thing to replace it, but it's not going to be available to work with single sign-on in a cloud environment until June of next year. And so you're like, well, what are they supposed to do between go live and when that happens? And so again, lack of communication, maybe even from, the product people to the sales team. Maybe the sales team didn't know about this during the sales process. I'm not saying there was any malice or like intentional misleading going on. It's just, in my mind, and the reason we're here and we're vendor agnostic is because we advocate for the client. We are here for the client. That's where my loyalty lies. And so it's frustrating when those types of things are being revealed so late in the process, because then you have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, do we really need this functionality? Do we really need it day one? How critical is it? And trying to figure, out kind of workarounds really to make sure that the functionality is available. The other thing too is what they purchased initially in the sales cycle to cover that particular functionality that I'm referring to. The new product is going to be more expensive, right? So then there's a hit to the budget as well. And so, and then maybe potentially some APIs and some other, work that has to go on behind the scenes to make it work, because now it's a different, so again, it's never one thing. It ends up going down 50 different rabbit holes because it's connected to so many other components of the project. So we've had quite a few issues with modules that were bolt-ons that actually serve really important functionality that the client needs. So again, we're now talking about UAT, and we've got all these scripts, and we're getting everybody ready, and we're doing all the training around that, making sure that the data is there and that all the EDI work is being done, and talking about cutover planning and getting really, really granular about what that's going to look like during that time. And so we need to be focused on those things. And instead, we've gotten dragged back sometimes to kind of go rework some of these modules and things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, you'd also mentioned a moment ago, you were talking about the organizational readiness and how 89 or 90% of the employees had never been through an implementation. And then you throw in some of these curveballs we're talking about that are vendor specific and related to the third party bolt-ons, and just some of the confusion around the product itself and which modules and bolt-ons are going to be required. But what about just the whole challenge? I guess the whole the fact that this is such a mature organization that's well established, which is good news, bad news, I suppose, when they're going through a change like this. The good news is that you have a certain amount of maturity around certain processes and certain things you do that are strengths as an organization. But when it comes time to change those things or to go through a transformation like this, the bad news is it can be a lot more difficult for a well-established organization to go through the changes just because of that. Things are so well baked into the DNA of the organization that it's a lot harder to change. What are some of the biggest organizational change challenges or signs of resistance have you seen as it relates to the process changes or moving to a modern cloud-based ERP system versus that legacy system? What are some of the how's that going so far from what you're seeing at this point in the project?
I will say we're turning a corner. I'll put it like that. Early on, it was people are, it's human nature, right? You're attached to the way that you do things and protective over your process and your data and the fact that you own this and other people don't touch it. And, this is how we do things. I think too, when you have somebody who's been doing it this way for 30 years, and that's not an exaggeration, there are people who've been doing it this way on this system for 30 years. There has been a little bit of a mindset of why do we need to change it? It's fine. And so that's not a bad thing. And you talk about this all the time in your podcasts and blogs and all that of people aren't necessarily trying to be resistors. It's just a natural part of the process. And so I think for this particular client, one of the hardest things, besides just the huge change from the type of technology they're using to where they're going, is the internal processes, right? Having pretty passionate discussions sometimes internally about this is why we do it like this. And other people or newer people or whatever, people in different areas, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not how people do it anymore. And so some of those conversations have been revisited, I'm not kidding, 7 or 8 times, right? Subsequent meetings, you got to pull in more people. We've got to reevaluate this and looking at, well, why do we use LIFO and why do we do it like this? And why are there 4 extra steps in this process when really all we need? And this is the whole crux of the issue, is that they don't know what the new technology is capable of. So they don't know that a lot of these manual steps that are part of their process are going to be obsolete. And you can't know that until you've played with and tested and seen your new system in action. And so there's a little bit of, trust. And like I said, every iteration of the UAT and them getting to get in there and play around and see it, like, oh, okay, well, it did it automatically, or this is automated now, or I don't have to slice and dice these 17 reports 8 different ways for 15 different people, because that's sort of the way it is now, right? You're pulling vast amounts of data, you're putting it into Excel, you're doing a million different things because all these people need different things. And in future state, it's not going to be like that. There won't be a need for that, right? There's going to be custom dashboards and there are reports you can query. There are all kinds of things that you can do to do that. But if you've never seen that kind of system or worked in that kind of system, you don't know. So I think that's one of the biggest change management issues, is telling people this is what it's going to be like, and they don't believe you. And so, but like I said, the more, because initially when people are in there playing around in the training modules and those types of things, it falls flat because it's not real. But now that their data is in there and they see their customer names and they see their sales orders and they see, now it's starting to all make sense. Like, okay, this is really I'm really starting to understand how this works. So that's been a pretty steep learning curve. And I think too, just being patient with people, and understanding that change is hard, and not trying to shame someone or make them feel like, come on, get with it. It's everyone has a very different reaction and different experience. I think too, it's always normal for people to start to think, this system seems to do a lot of what I do for my job. Right. And people are like, what, and that's kind of one of the points of, this type of system is to get people away from having to be in the weeds all the time and do so much manual work so people can focus on more strategic, forward-looking initiatives, right? Instead of being caught up in the work of all this manual stuff when you're bogged down with an old system. So.
Yeah. All right, great stuff. Thanks, Amanda. We're going to take a quick break, and I've got a bunch more questions for you when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling and I'm here with Amanda Patton. We're talking about a case study of a manufacturer that's going through a digital transformation. So let's jump right back into the conversation. You mentioned something interesting that just triggered another sort of a sub question here is you were talking earlier, but just a second ago about LIFO, like, which for those that don't know, last in, first out way of valuing or costing inventory. And it's also an inventory management process too. But are there other, can you give us a couple examples of other impacts to the organization, like other things like that are sort of being challenged, or their mindset shifts for the organization or for different team members, no matter how small they may be? Do you have any examples like that?
I think, one of the things is I'm trying not to get too specific so I don't, reveal anything that I'm not supposed to reveal, but what are the kind of rules, right? In terms of customizations, or this customer wants this. And that's been one of the huge things. When you're as old as this company is and you have as many longtime loyal customers as they do, you have a lot of exceptions, right? For customers. This customer only can have blue ink on their packing slip, or, this customer doesn't want this packaged with that. It has to be separated out, and these plastic sleeves have to be labeled in a different way because of how they receive inventory or whatever. Special custom orders that a lot of companies would just say no to, right? Because it doesn't make sense at that volume. It doesn't make sense for them financially to fulfill those types of things. But this company does those things without exception because they're customer centric. And so a lot of it has been around the rules of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and setting, parameters around what's going to work for the business model. And across customer service, sales, production, there were these kind of arguments about this may be better for the company from a convenience standpoint, but we don't care because we're always going to do what's best for our customer. And so those are some examples. And like I just said, the color of ink, or the way things are packaged, or, just teeny tiny details that may not seem that important. in the grand scheme of things, but to them they are, because they have a really loyal customer base. Trying to think of some other just small process things. I'll think of something. It'll come to me.
No, that's a good one. I mean, but it's a good. I mean, even just the minute example of the color of ink, on a invoice or packing, what a packing slip looks like, or how you, how you separate the materials into different. I forgot how you said it, but how you package things for specific customers. You look at that in a software vendor would probably look at that and say, well, that's not best practice. Our software has best practice, which is a more consistent way of doing things, and so that's what drives me crazy about that term best practices, is because in this case, you look at this client and say, well, is that best practice? The way the software works, is that really best practice when you have this customer centric customer experience that you're focused on? And those two things are oftentimes in conflict. And so you've got to, resolve that and say, well, are we going to focus on efficiency and standardization and common processes, or are we going to retain that sort of customer centric model that we have? And I think that's where a lot of companies struggle, is like, what's the right answer there?
Yeah. And if you don't know ERP speak, and you don't know what a future state looks like with this new system, you may just be able to be pulled around by the vendor, right? If they tell you should do this, maybe you just do it because you don't know, you're not sure. And so you think, well, they're the experts, I guess we'll just do whatever they're saying. But, and like you say this a lot in your, stuff that you do is about, you've got to know what makes you special, right? And sometimes, yes, there's a lot of best practices that can be applied across the board, but those are probably going to be pretty similar for most in that particular industry. But if you know that something is a key differentiator, and is the reason why your customers keep coming back, then regardless of best practice or not, or what the vendor thinks about it, you know your business better than anyone. Like, a vendor can't tell you how your business is on a day-to-day basis. You're the one who knows it. You do it every single day. So you have to be the source of those decisions. And, would it be easier to go with best practice to make things more convenient for the company? Yes. At the expense of their customer experience, though, which they're not willing to do, right? Which is why they're so successful. So, you have to pick and choose those things. And sometimes those things require customizations, right? And that costs a little bit more money, and it's going to take a little bit more time. But in the end, it's important for this customer to be able to do that for this client to be able to do that for their customers. And there's all these little conversations about backflushing. Should we be backflushing? Should we auto invoice? There's price breaks. Where should the price break happen? We have, they're putting out catalogs with new pricing. But these old customers are grandfathered in at this rate for all of eternity, right? And all of that has to be accounted for in the software. So I think that's really what it is,
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. Now, how, in general, I don't know if you have a good answer for this yet, just because I know we're in the middle of things, but if you do have a good answer for this, I'd be curious to see what you think. When you look at the sort of that call it a tension or a trade-off between sort of vanilla software deployment and sort of what the software can do off the shelf versus business processes and some of the stuff you were just talking about, some of the variations and exceptions and things that are focused on making the customers happy.
Right.
Assuming those two things are in conflict often, sort of where's the needle? Is the needle shifting? Which way is it going? Like how is that? How do you see that unfolding so far? Because I'm always curious about that, because I feel like that's such a key point of tension. That's hard to get alignment as an organization on where you want to fall. And to your point, the vendor's probably pushing you more towards the vendor focused or the product focused answer, and that may or may not be the right business answer. So how do you, I don't know if you have a good way to explain like where you think this customer is and where they're headed on that front.
We are in the thick of it right now, so I can report back later.
Sure.
But a big part of it is, so like, for example, right when we started taking inventory of, okay, here's everything out of the box. Here's what we know future state. Here's what we learned in end to end. Here's what we've learned in the build sessions that we've been in, and all the subsequent conversations that needed to happen around business process. We, I think, came out with 83 customizations, right? Whether those be forms, BPMs, reports, dashboards, like any type of customization, right? And so the process right now that we're going through is pretty painstaking, long conversations about is it something that we really need? Is it something we need right now? Um, are we sure that the out of the box functionality doesn't address this? We just haven't looked at it in the right way yet, right? And so it's just that exploration of all of that. Of those 83 customizations, probably for phase one, for go live, there'll probably be about 8 to 10 that get moved forward. And so it's not straightforward. A lot of time the vendor wants to make it seem like it's straightforward, like it's like, oh, we'll just do this, right? Well, no, that's not going to work. And so, of course, that sets off a lot of other conversations. And it's been a really good exercise, I think, in the company really better understanding themselves and each other and where they've been, where they are now, and where they want to go. Even though everyone's agreed that future state is where they want to be, and be able to project trends and get better with like the whole Amazon world and, selling directly to consumers and 3PLs and all the, all the new things that have come in. It's still this, when people get worried or afraid or confused, we want to go back to what we know. Right. And so it's like a rubber band, and it's depending on the day, right? We can be anywhere on that spectrum. But I think the more that these conversations happen, they take a lot of time. And yeah, the easy thing is just to do what the vendor says, right? Okay, let's just shove you guys into a box that the functionality says that you should be in. Sometimes that makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So I think it's been a really good exercise. It's been very eye-opening, I think, as departments understand what other departments are dealing with and kind of what that looks like. And there's a lot of overlap. There's a bunch of learning opportunities that they've had across different functional areas. So yeah, I don't have a direct answer.
Sure.
It's
No,
in
that's
flux.
helpful.
It's in flux. Yeah.
Well, that's super helpful because, a lot, I think you said it well when you said, vendors do try to kind of force you into a box. And I think for a lot of organizations, you want to assume that whatever product or technologies you're deploying is the best fit of what, what options are out there in the marketplace. In this case, it sounds like, this probably is the best fit product for this client, but that doesn't mean it's a perfect fit. And it doesn't mean that the vanilla off-the-shelf software is going to address all of their needs. There are going to be things that are going to have to change on the technology side, and certainly the organization itself is going to have to change to adapt to the software. So it's sort of a two-prong change approach. But I think a lot of vendors would, to your point, they tend to oversimplify things and say, well, just do it the way the software does it. Well, that's easy to say when you're a software vendor because that's all you know, and
Exactly.
you don't have to live with the consequences day to day once you go live on that new system. And I think that's where, I think it's good that some of those painstaking conversations are happening right now, because that's a way to work through and make sure you've got clarity and alignment on what is it we can live with, what can't we live with, what do we need to change ourselves, what do we need to change in the software and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we're, that's where third stage comes in, is sort of that neutral party that can see across all the, the whole entire project, across the different dynamics and people jockeying for power and just all the different dynamics that are going on, which is just normal human nature, and being willing to have those difficult conversations and, not get too far into the weeds, but deep enough to where, okay, this is not going to work for us the way we need it to. And just having the vendor be accommodating, and you don't have to get a custom built house. But if you move into a house that's already been built and it's builder's grade, it works, the light fixtures work and the stuff works, but it may not be exactly what you want. And I think that's the process we're going through, is like, it's okay, but it's not going to do it the way we need it to be done. And then having that discussion about, is it worth the extra money? Is it worth the extra time? Do we need the customization? What if we wait until phase 2 and let phase 1 really play out and just see how we're doing after go live for a few months? And then we can do a reassessment around some of these. And I think those 83 items are going to get moved at 8 to 10. And then the rest of them maybe will be pushed for a while, because like I said, they don't know yet what it's going to be like in the real world on their new system. So having having the patience, and then of course having the processes written for workarounds and manual things in case something doesn't work, right? Being prepared for everything. So
Right. All right, great stuff. Thanks, Amanda. We're going to take a quick break, and I've got a bunch more questions for you when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling and I'm here with Amanda Patton. We're talking about a case study of a manufacturer that's going through a digital transformation. So let's jump right back into the conversation that the client and us are facing here. What are some of the biggest takeaways you would leave for a team that's about to go through a similar sort of transformation? You know, are there lessons specific to this client, this project that you'd say, you know, here's some key takeaways or things to think about as you embark on your own transformation journey?
how much time do we have?
We could spend a whole hour just on that, but how would you summarize a couple of those things that you know, the most immediate or highest priority things that come to mind?
I would say to allow more time than you think it's going to take. That's a big one. And I've already alluded to it several times. That means internal discussions across all teams, leaving that extra time to discover and explore things that are going to come up. I don't care how well planned out it is, there will be surprises and speed bumps in the road. And so having the time set aside for that. You also have to have time to let the steering committee and the board, right? Because that can take forever to get on people's calendars, to track them down, to let them look over the information. You may have to present the information to them so that they can go make a decision when it's really stuff that really has to be decided at a super high level. That has, you know, costs more time than we anticipated in some cases. UAT scripts, the data migration plan, again, more time than you would think, right? So put a 20%, you know, insurance layer in there of time, because like we talked about, people have full-time day jobs. They now have a ton of hours being added for the implementation. And so finding the time that we need for all these deep conversations sometimes that we have to have, it's really difficult to do. In fact, you know, sometimes we're doing it at night or on weekends because there's no other time, right? What else? The EDI hardware definitely, especially right now with our global supply chain being clogged. That's a fun little surprise of it's taking how long to get the scanners, you know, the scan guns and the printers and everything, right? You've got to have that stuff for go live. And so having months of lead time is really important, especially right now. Luckily we were prepared for that, so we're good. But if we hadn't been, we might be in trouble. I think having an extensive plan with every line item laid out, who's responsible, when it's due. Even if we're just coming in, even if third stage is just coming in from a QAPM perspective, I still like to have everything covered. So because we have our team, we have the system integrator, we have the vendor, we have the client team. It's a lot of teams with a lot of lenses and a lot of deliverables going on. And so being able to track all of that, which is what I do, I want to track everything. For this one in particular, I would talk about, you know, wanting to understand the vendor's roadmap. And if they're going through a huge upgrade or they have a lot going on behind the scenes, knowing ahead of time before you sign a contract, what does this mean? What does this look like? And getting really specific and kind of beating them up on, you know, getting answers, you know, definitive answers. Any products that are being sold during the sales cycle, when you get around to implementing, has anything changed? Do you have any updates for us? What do we need to know? Is this going to work in the cloud? Does it work in a single sign-on environment? Just all these little details that, don't seem like a big deal until they don't work, right? And then it's a really, really big deal. And then if you have a client going from on-prem to cloud, just making sure that everyone understands the changes, the challenges, the benefits of what that actually means. Because a lot of times these older companies, will be on-prem and the cloud is just a whole nother universe, right? And what does that mean for all these customizations and all of that? And every single time there's an update, what is that going to look like for our internal IT team? And just really, really understanding, because again, it's a completely different world. So that's kind of a long list. I have many more, but those are the main ones that come to mind.
Those are good ones, especially, I like the part about the way you describe all the little things that are big things that can affect a timeline. There's a big difference between what a vendor says they could do in terms of implementing technology in theory versus implementing technology to fit a business and in actuality. Those two things oftentimes get disconnected in what the vendor thinks is possible versus what is realistically possible from an organizational and operational perspective.
Yeah, and I would always also say too, that coming from the vendor side, just remember that there's salespeople, and really doing due diligence on, oh yeah, sure, we can do that, right? Really understanding what that's going to look like, and also understanding how much of the hand-holding is going to be done by the vendor. I think I had a much greater expectation of this particular vendor than what has been delivered. And so there's been quite a bit of disappointment and heartburn and even conflict at some points in the project, right? And it was explained during the sales cycle that this customer was not familiar with an ERP implementation, and we're going to need a lot of extra help and assistance. And that has not been delivered. So a lot of times, if you've been working for a vendor for 30 years, all the acronyms and all the things you say, it makes perfect sense to you because you do it every single day. And making sure that vendor really cares about that customer in a way that's going to explain things, break down the acronyms. What does this mean? How long is this going to take? How do we do this? How do we write a UAT script? How do we, right? Saying something needs to be done and understanding actually what it looks like to get it done, to write a plan to get it done, and helping your people, training your people on how to do it. There's just been a big gulf between what was expected and what's being delivered. So
yeah, that's good stuff. I mean, there's a very good I think that's a good overview of some of the higher priority obstacles and challenges and pitfalls that organizations often face. We see that a lot of those things you mentioned we see often with our other clients as well, and that's part of what we do is help manage and navigate those issues for sure. So, well, I want to thank you. That was a very good overview, and I know there's a lot more we could talk about. And in fact, we probably will want to have you back on to talk about, as we get even further into the process, what are some of the additional lessons and curveballs, and how did it go overall, all that stuff. So this will be a good one to build on at some future point if you're open to that. So I want to thank you for being on here today. This was a super helpful discussion.
Sure. Yeah, it was fun. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Amanda. Thanks for being here on the show today. That was a great discussion and a lot of good nuggets and takeaways of stuff that we can all learn and apply to our digital transformations. In fact, Kyler and I are going to build on some of the points that we talked about here in just a moment. When we come back from a quick break, you're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 44. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham, and Kyler, we just had this great conversation with Amanda. She was sharing some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of a transformation in a client that she's working with right now, and some of those lessons. What were some of the things that jumped out at you as we were having that conversation?
She is a consultant and also a therapist. Very well spoken when it comes to our different initiatives here at Third Stage, or what she's helping our clients through. So something I wanted to kind of ask you about when we talk about those mid-size, specifically in those manufacturing business process space type of clients, is that extremely difficult when she mentioned kind of just that overall process change and managing to that fear?
Yeah, it is very common. And by the way, back to your point about her being part therapist and being good at that, I totally agree with that. That's part of what makes her such a great team member and such an effective consultant. Because to be a good consultant, you have to be very empathetic, which she is, and you have to understand people. You have to understand where they're coming from. And I think as executives, for those of you that are executives at organizations that might be about to go through a transformation, or maybe you are going through one already, it's very tempting to think that this isn't going to be that difficult for people, or people just need to get over it because we're changing. So why are we going to sit there and listen to them complain all day? I get it. There is a fine line there, but you do need to understand where people are coming from. And so what I would say is that an overwhelming majority of clients that we work with, I would argue that all of them, I can't think of a single example where this is not true, what I'm about to say, but that is that every organization has challenges with change management. And even the ones that think it's going to be easy, it's typically a lot harder than they think. And it's especially true for organizations that have highly tenured staff, especially true for organizations that are very well established, very mature, well-defined processes, or at least processes that have been around for a long time. That makes it that much harder to change. So it is very common. And so in order to overcome that resistance, you do have to have that empathy and that therapist mindset that I need to understand why these people are afraid. Not judge them for it, not because we're going to fix them or tell them why they're wrong, but because we need to understand why. Is it because they're feeling insecure because they relied on heroics to add value to the organization? Now you're taking the heroics away because you're creating more of a standard process that is going to replace those heroics. Those are the kinds of things you have to understand in order to be effective as a change practitioner. And you can't really take a one-size-fits-all shotgun approach to change management. You need to target it to why people are feeling that anxiety and fear.
Do you experience a lot of resistance from those types of people when you are trying to go through an exercise like business process mapping, which she was kind of talking about? That was something they were going through to try and optimize their overall business operations. Is that kind of a pain point, or can that be hard to garner that data, knowing that that's really all they've known since they've grown as an organization?
It can be. Usually the easy place to start to get that momentum and get people comfortable and get them engaged is to talk about, first of all, the things that are working, because there are things that you're not going to change. You don't want to, and you shouldn't change because they're so core to who you are as an organization. They're core to your customer experience. They're core to making you better than your competitors. And so you can build on those things and say, okay, we're doing these things well, so those might be things we leave alone. Here are things that we aren't doing well, or things that are holding us back from getting to the next level. And oftentimes the team recognizes those. Like it's a very manual process. We have to re-enter data, or I spend a lot of my time looking, through emails for this piece of information that really should reside in a system, or whatever it is. So then you get people excited about, like, okay, yeah, these are real problems that make me stressed out. But then so those first two layers they're not easy, but it's a good way to get people engaged in a non-threatening way. But the third layer is then, what are the more opportunistic opportunities to change? Maybe the things that the team's not thinking about. And these are sort of the, industry common business processes, or as consultants, we see a lot of different business models and operational models that we can apply to different clients. And that's where we kind of bring our ideas in. And usually those are much better received when we've done those first two things, which is focus on the strengths, look at the immediate low-hanging fruit for opportunity, and then you get to the more strategic stuff that's sort of more the forward-thinking changes. So it's easier said than done, but usually that's a way to get the best of both worlds. You're bringing in those outside best practices. You're thinking outside the box. You're bringing in outside thinking from consultants, but you're also not disrupting and threatening the team as much as they would be otherwise if you just came in hot with brand new ideas without considering, how things are today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wonder, and this may be, really basic question, but when you're going through these different exercises to really lay out your processes, when you're trying to see, what do we actually need from a software perspective, is that hard to do in a manufacturing environment when you are a remote?
It is more difficult, I think. I know everyone is enamored with this whole Zoom thing and doing as much work remotely as possible. I'll admit, as a caveat, I am somewhat old school. I think being in person, you just get more substance and there's more meat to it. Not that everything we do needs to be in person collaboratively, but there is value in that for sure. Especially with something like manufacturing, to your point, where it's not a white collar type of job, such as financial services, where, okay, financial services company or even a bank or something like that, we don't need to necessarily see the office or the cubicle where someone's sitting to understand what they're doing, because they can show us just as easily on a screen. But when it comes to how you make a certain widget and how stuff flows throughout a warehouse or through a shop floor, how it gets loaded on the truck, I mean, you have to understand that. You can't understand that stuff fully without seeing it. And so I think there's a balancing act that needs to happen for sure. It doesn't need to go all one direction or the other, but there's some middle ground that typically is pretty powerful for manufacturing companies especially.
Excellent. Well, do you think you and Amanda complete and let us know, how it kind of turns out? Because I know I was kind of like cliffhanger here,
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely want to have her back. I think it would be a fun thread to kind of connect the dots from where we are today to where we are in the future. And, that case study was really interesting because, every transformation has its challenges. Every software solution and the software vendor adds to the mix some challenges. But in this case, this was sort of a second tier industry focused solution that isn't quite as robust in terms of its delivery capabilities. And those were the root causes of a lot of the challenges she was talking about. And so it's just something to be mindful of. I mean, with those the tier 2 and tier 3 enterprise technology solutions, there's unique challenges. And on the flip side, if you're going with like an SAP or an Oracle or a Microsoft, one of the really big, established, well-known vendors, those have their own challenges. And usually it's more focused on, it's trying to be everything to everyone, and you're trying to make it fit your business. And sometimes fitting the business can be very difficult. So it's just a good reminder that different types of businesses, different types of technologies are going to have different challenges and trade-offs. So the long-winded way of saying, yeah, let's have her back. I think it'd be good to see how that all comes full circle here. Well, good. Well, yeah, thanks for that debrief with our discussion with Amanda. And speaking of great consultants and case studies, we are going to have Adam Cheatham, who is a director on the Third Stage team. He's going to be on the show here. You had a chance to do a video with him. I think it was for our YouTube channel, right? Or was it for our Stratosphere podcast, the sister podcast? Mm-hmm. Take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have Adam Cheatham on the show talking about end of life with software vendors, in particular Microsoft Great Plains, but a lot of what we'll talk about here will apply to other vendors too, because a lot of them are doing the same thing, which is sunsetting their old legacy on-premise systems. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 44, your podcast for all things related to digital transformation, ERP implementations, HCM, CRM, supply chain management, best of breed, whatever it is you're doing in terms of your transformation, this podcast is for you. And in our final segment here today, we wanted to talk about, or just play a clip of a video Kyler, that you produced with Adam Cheatham, who is a director of strategy and transformation, and spoiler alert, also your husband, coincidentally, who actually I've worked with since well before even starting Third Stage, and that's how I know you is through him. But the reason we want to have him on the show, and the reason this clip is so fascinating, is because we had put out a blog, or he wrote a blog. I don't know when it was I think early this year, maybe. He wrote a blog about Microsoft and their plans to sunset Great Plains. And at the time, they had set a date, I think, of 2025 was when they were going to sunset Great Plains, but they got so much blowback that they changed that date. Well, in the meantime, we already published the blog, and then it started getting a lot of traction, and Microsoft VARs and Microsoft themselves and a lot of people in the community have reached out to us saying, will you please take that blog down? And I hope you don't mind me sharing the story. Your first reaction was, yeah, let's take this blog down. We don't want to upset anyone. I'm the marketing person, so I'm gonna make sure the vendors aren't mad at us. And I sort of overrode you and said, no, leave it up, because guess what? We're just the messenger. We are not the ones that decided we were going to cut off support. We did add a disclaimer, sort of an update that says, okay, since this original blog, they've since walked back those comments, but the fact of the matter is, this is what the industry does, and this is what drives me crazy about the industry, is that they make these unilateral changes that affect hundreds or thousands of organizations throughout the world, and they expect you just to deal with it and just suck it up, and it becomes your problem. And then when people like us call it out, we get flack for it sometimes. So this is probably the most controversial blog we've ever published, right? And I think I can say that pretty confidently. Even though I try to be controversial, sometimes this one, for whatever reason, really struck a nerve in the Microsoft community. So I'm excited to see what Adam has to say. But what were your thoughts, just maybe to set it up, or what can we expect in this discussion here?
Yeah, so basically, this all kind of stemmed from, we were getting a lot of emails, and it sometimes is, you kind of have to laugh at it, because they'll go through our content aggregator or contact system, and they'll put like, you are a liar at liarsrus.com. So it gets very like petty, which is something, as someone who's kind of new to the software space, I never had any idea that some people could get so passionate about this. And a few weeks back, we had actually a Google review that they had put, Adam Cheatham puts the cheat in Cheatham. And I, had written a funny email to him saying, could you please stop disgracing the family name, dragging us through the mud.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. And by the way, just to say it again, when you play this clip, it is very focused on Microsoft, but I would encourage anyone listening to this that's thinking about their legacy system or their legacy vendor, and or any future state vendors they might be considering. This is a very common tactic we're seeing in the market right now. It's a very disruptive tactic. It's unfortunately working for the vendors. They're scaring people and forcing them to upgrade to these cloud solutions that they make more money on. So this is all economically driven. This is all money driven. And so creating these artificial sunset dates are what a lot of them are doing. And Microsoft is by no means the only one doing it. By the way, one last thing I'll say, not to beat a dead horse, but what I find ironic about all the complaints we're getting from the Microsoft community is that, per what you mentioned earlier in this episode, Microsoft Dynamics is number one on our list of top 10 ERP systems. So on one hand, they're number one, but on the other hand, they are really upset with us because we call out the truth, which is, you said end of life was 2025. Yes, you changed your mind, but that doesn't change the fact that you did set a date for end of life. So I find that dichotomy very, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So like we've kind of talked about and done a pre-debrief, Adam Cheatham here is going to talk about being a part of the Microsoft Great Plains kind of big scandal within the Third Stage community. So with that, welcome, Adam. It's great to have you. So Adam, you've been getting a lot of grief on the internet. You've been almost like canceled, if you will, when it comes to Microsoft Great Plains because of all of the vendor feedback. Can you kind of tell us why that is?
Well, for starters, this is a bit of a disruptive story because vendors that sell and maintain Microsoft Great Plains make a lot of money off of that. Now, we've gotten quite a lot of feedback over a multitude of channels about that blog. For those of you who are who have recently read it, you may have noticed that we've also updated that blog to make sure that it is accurate. For starters, though, the Microsoft at one point did come out and announce a plan to end of life Great Plains. And I believe the year was for 2025. Now, the reason that I know that this is true is because I have had vendor clients who have called and told me, freaking out before we even wrote the blog, that they heard from their vendor Microsoft is going to be end of lifing Great Plains support in 2025, and it's time to upgrade to Microsoft Dynamics F&O or Business Central. So out there in the marketplace, vendors are telling their clients that this is going to happen. I didn't make this story up. I didn't get it from some fictional place. I'm getting it from clients of ours who are sharing the pressure that their vendors and system integrators and system support teams are applying on them to upgrade from Microsoft Great Plains to a more lucrative platform for them.
Gotcha. And so let's kind of back up and talk about what Microsoft Great Plains is
Yeah.
and why companies have such an affinity for it.
So Microsoft Great Plains is a very strong finance-focused ERP. It does do quite a lot of things in the manufacturing space and the distribution space, but it's mostly focused on finance. It's been around for quite some time. It's a strong legacy system and has a bit of a cult following that not very many legacy ERP systems enjoy. So Microsoft folks that are on Microsoft Great Plains have been tend to have been on it for quite some time and really like the functionality in it, which is part of why this story is so disruptive, because they like this software system.
Mm-hmm.
And to be threatened with end of life by their software provider is a scary moment for those businesses.
Absolutely. And so, in kind of digging into a lot of the feedback that you get, and I think it's important for our community to know we get feedback from vendors all the time about content we put out because we are completely agnostic and independent. So that those opinions, because they're not influenced by anyone, that means that a lot of times the vendors had wished we had said something different. So that's pretty typical for an independent entity like Third Stage, because we're going to recommend what's best for our clients, not what's best for the vendor or so vendors like us. That's kind of the disruptive nature of the content that we put out. Just with Great Plains, we seem to have kind of struck a nerve in there. If anyone wants some comedic relief, you can head over to our Google reviews, where Adam has put the cheat in Cheatham, according to the bot from some reviews there. And we share a last name, so I really take offense to that deeply, but which is a side note of kind of how that works when it comes to our vendor communications. We talk a lot about it with Eric, that we're kind of frenemies, if you will, when it comes to vendors. They're important and valued partners, but we don't do what they say. So just kind of a caveat to kind of understand that relationship. So Adam, when it comes to Great Plains and you get this information as a client, what are the next steps to kind of deciding what you do?
So there are a number of things that are important to remember in this space. First and foremost, just because Microsoft is going to eventually one day stop supporting Microsoft Great Plains, that doesn't mean that there won't be available services for supporting Great Plains. There are literally thousands of Microsoft partners across the world who support all kinds of different Microsoft packages, Great Plains included. And more will pop up as Microsoft starts to vacate that space. So that doesn't, just because Microsoft stops supporting it doesn't mean that you won't get support. I have clients on all kinds of different software systems who which have been end of life. There is no support for them. Some of them are written in languages that don't exist in programming anymore, and they still have partners to help them support those systems. So that doesn't, just because Microsoft vacates that space doesn't mean that you no longer can use Microsoft Great Plains as your software, enterprise software. So that's thing one. Thing two is that as you start to think about what your upgrade path looks like, the upgrade path from Microsoft Great Plains to Microsoft Dynamics 365 is, for all intents and purposes, a brand new implementation. So what I would encourage you to understand, and as you're upgrading or considering it, is there are other software packages out there that may be a more viable fit for you than Microsoft Dynamics. Whether it's Business Central, finance operations, supply chain, or whichever package it is they're calling it these days. You have lots more options, particularly as you're thinking about your company size. Companies that are on Microsoft Great Plains tend to be in the small to medium business space, and in a lot of ways, there are other systems that are better fits. Inforesight Line, NetSuite, Microsoft Business Central is a viable upgrade path. Epicor, Acumatica. There are tons of other options out there that you may consider if you are thinking about upgrading from Great Plains.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Why would a company like Microsoft discontinue something that seems to have quite a cult following, if you will?
Well, we're seeing this even more so in the software as a subscription space. Right now, Microsoft or any service provider only makes money off of Great Plains as a maintenance package, which is typically a pretty low fee. As you start thinking about migrating to a subscription service like Dynamics 365, you are now creating a monthly cash flow option where where Microsoft's clients will pay for software month to month. That's a dramatic change in the revenue model for them, and a significant financial incentive. That's part of it, right? There are also some costs to maintaining more antiquated software, and as it pertains to the company that owns it. Microsoft right now is starting to focus all of their research and development dollars on other software systems. So keeping up with Great Plains, the security patches, making sure that it, particularly from a cybersecurity perspective, bug fixes, those types of things, it costs time and resources. And Microsoft, as you would expect, would rather put those time and resources into a more lucrative package that allows for the creation of a more consistent revenue stream. And it's not just Microsoft that's doing this. What's interesting about this is that the other package that I've seen this the most frequently with is JD Edwards, which is owned by Oracle. JD Edwards was almost an accidental, or we'll call it an incidental purchase when Oracle purchased PeopleSoft, and they wanted to get away from supporting JD Edwards from the moment they purchased PeopleSoft. I think it was in the 90s, and they have been unable to sunset that program. That doesn't mean that Oracle isn't trying to get people off of JD Edwards and onto Oracle ERP Cloud, because again, Oracle ERP Cloud is a subscription software that creates a monthly or a quarterly revenue for Oracle. And I've even had clients who have wanted to compare JD Edwards to Oracle ERP Cloud and see which whether it's more viable to sink more resources into a larger JD Edwards footprint or to move into Oracle ERP Cloud. And Oracle won't sell it to them. They wouldn't give them a price sheet. They wouldn't give them any costs on what additional licenses would be. They wouldn't provide implementation services costs. So it's the point here is that um, there's a revenue side of this and there's a cost side of this. It's better revenue for these ERP companies to get you into the cloud, not a subscription service. And it also is a lower cost for them to continue maintaining these antiquated systems.
Gotcha. I want to come back to the subscription model in just a little bit, but just so we know, what is Microsoft Great Plains now going to do? Are they going to end their support for the system in 2025, or what's kind of the latest there?
No, so they're continuing support for for several years beyond that 2025, that original 2020 or more recent 2025 deadline. So they'll continue to support that package. What's likely to happen is that they'll come out in a couple of years and say, "All right, we're going to end the life it, create a little bit of buzz around it, see if they can't get a couple of upgrades out of it, and then walk that back." This is pretty common in this space. You'll see it with other software providers. That's what's probably going to happen. My guess is that as the space comes together, there's still quite a long runway as far as the roadmap for Microsoft Great Plains is concerned.
Right. So just out of curiosity, because it can look like, you don't like Microsoft or something like that. Is that true, or is that true for any system that Third Stage may or may not recommend?
Yeah, and, for starters, that Third Stage and I as well are 100% industry software technology agnostic, totally independent. I don't have a preference for which software products my clients are on, whether it's what their legacy system is or what their future system might be. My main focus is to consider technology as an enabler of business objectives, and when technology is serving to inhibit those business objectives, it's time to make some changes. If Microsoft Great Plains is still continuing to serve your business and allow you to grow, then great, keep it. I don't. If you're on any other software platform, if it's doing what you want it to do and allowing you to grow, then keep it. There's no need to spend a ton of money on an ERP upgrade because that does get expensive. So, uh, you know, I don't have a preference on what that looks like, and we're recommending different software packages, Microsoft included, all the time. So I would say that for those who think that we're biased against Microsoft, get in line, because there are folks that think that we're biased against every other platform that's their favorite, and it's just part of the cost of doing business for a firm, which takes an independent stance. You get people that want to throw rocks at you from just about every direction.
Sure. And just for comparison's sake, we do have a top 10 ERP system list just generally for 2022, and Microsoft D63, sorry, Cassie, cut that one. Microsoft D363, geez. Microsoft Dynamics 365 is number one on our list this year, and that's a new movement in that leadership. So that's a huge placement. We do PR campaigns around it, that type of thing. So that should showcase, that we have great partners at Microsoft, and continue to support them when it makes sense for our clients. So moving to that subscription model, I'm interested to hear your feedback. We talk a lot about ERP cloud and what that means in migrating from maybe an on-premise system to a cloud solution. and the costs that come with that. So a lot of times we've heard from our community, our audience, or our clients that these are being kind of pitched or communicated in a way that equates to cost savings, and that might not be the case in the long term. So I wondered your feedback when it came to that subscription-based model and cloud solutions.
So, I mean, it's to get beyond a 5-year total cost of ownership on cost savings and expenses is really difficult to do. On a 5-year total cost of ownership, we do tend to see that's on-premise versus subscription services do tend to be about the same if you start to factor in all the hardware support that you need for on-prem, and the maintenance fees and those types of things. Because you're going to have to buy servers and you're going to have to maintain a server room and all of those types of things. You're going to have to pay somebody to do that. So there is a cost associated with that on the on-prem side that we see about over 5 years. It's about even. The challenge is after that, your license fees don't go down; they go up as time goes on. Whereas your maintenance fees for your system integrator and maintenance partner remain more or less static and are a fraction of the cost. So there's a good chance if you looked farther out at it, that from just a pure dollar comparison, on-premise could shake out to be less expensive on the whole, but at the same time, you don't get the benefits of continuing to have that live updating software. One of the greatest benefits of cloud and subscription-based software packages is you are always up to date, and you are always getting all of the upgrades that are being deployed with the system, as opposed to being stuck in a more static environment where it's on you to determine when your upgrades are brought in, and it's much more difficult to maintain that on your own.
Gotcha. So it's kind of sounds like it really, as in my favorite thing for consultants to always say is it depends, right? Is always the the
Yes.
answer. It depends on the organization and their needs. When it comes to the subscription-based type of model, is that where the industry is heading as a whole?
Oh yeah, for sure. The subscription-based model is not going away anytime soon. Um, it seems to me that that's a well, at least for me personally, that's a bit of a challenge in that it doesn't matter how successful your business is, your subscription fees will always be there. And it puts you in a position where you're dependent on continuing to pay those fees to be able to run your business. It would almost be like having to pay a cardiologist to keep my heart pumping. And if depending on the circumstances of my life, if I don't have the money to pay for that, well, too bad. Sucks for you. So as businesses change, it does create a different dependency on your software and the costs associated to it. That's really hard to mitigate those costs as time goes on. So I'd say that this is going to stick around long term. You're going to see more and more of these types of things, not just as software platforms as a service, but also integration platforms as a service to be able to connect two different cloud services to each other. You'll pay for that. So now all of a sudden you're paying 3 different subscriptions, on the whole. So it's not going away anytime soon, that's for sure.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
And what would be some best practices for companies to be able to budget for these types of subscription models? Or what's the best way that you recommend to prepare when it comes to considering that in the evaluation process?
Yeah, so focus first and foremost on getting the right system that fits your business, that is going to enable the type of growth and objectives that you're shooting for. Because if in the end you continue to grow, you don't have to face that problem. So you want to first and foremost get the right system, and implement it well is the second piece of it. Try to stay as out of the box as possible. Try to stay as vanilla as possible. Know that modifications to software are required to maintain competitive advantages and who you are in the marketplace, and that's important to also realize. But on the whole, implementing as close to standard functionality as possible and adjusting to be able to accommodate that is another important piece that will allow you to continue to grow with that system, and allow you to continue to reap the benefits of that system as it evolves.
Interesting. Those are definitely all great considerations when moving to, a cloud-based platform or looking at that subscription model in general. Any final thoughts when it comes to Microsoft Great Plains, or any, message to your haters out there when it comes to any additional feedback or
Yeah,
recommendations for clients?
for sure. So again, I didn't make that up. I got it directly from the horse's mouth. Vendors who were telling clients that come to us that their vendor said Great Plains is end of life in 2025. That message has changed, of course, and we're glad to see that. And it's Microsoft Great Plains is a fantastic software platform. It serves our clients very well, in a lot of spaces. So I would say that don't be afraid to keep Microsoft Great Plains. But at the same time, if you find that you've outgrown it and it's no longer servicing your needs, or you want to think long term and say, this means that there's a shift in tone around Great Plains, and that the support that it's going to get from Microsoft will continue to wane in the future, then give us a call. Reach out to us on LinkedIn, or through our website, and just let's have a conversation about where you're at, and maybe I can help you figure out what it is the best next steps are for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today, Adam. We always love having you.
course.
And if you do have additional questions, Adam's contact information is below in our description. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our software comparison playlist if you'd like some more information on software systems in general. Great insight, and sorry you're experiencing some cancel culture within within this piece of content that you help us put together. Again, I would really encourage all of our listeners to go read the blog and then read the updates too, as we continue to watch this evolving story. But thank you so much for being here today. And after the break, Eric and I will kind of talk more about what it means to be a disruptor within the software vendor community.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
So welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm Kyler Cheatham here with Eric Kimberling. And Eric, I'm curious to hear, as kind of the OG disruptor of software vendors being mad at you. Does that create any sort of reaction when it comes to kind of what Adam has experienced with the significant flowback from the Great Plains blog?
Yeah, I mean, we get most of the time. You'd be surprised that most of the time I expect more blowback than we get. So there's blogs I've written where I just think, okay, this I've really crossed a line now, or I'm going to get an extreme amount of pushback on this one. A couple examples were, a while back I had written an article. This is a long time ago, maybe 3 years ago, or in the early months of having just started Third Stage when we were still trying to make a name for ourselves and whatnot. I wrote a blog about getting Accentured and basically calling out Accenture and not just Accenture, but Deloitte and all the big system integrators that sort of, that have a tendency to mislead and to mismanage expectations with their clients. And they tend to take over implementations. They tend to charge too much. They tend to hide things from clients. A lot of unhealthy behavior. And I know because I used to work at one of them. Back in early in my career, and we see it all the time as an independent advisor. So that blog, for example, I thought, okay, I'm gonna get a ton of pushback on this because I'm calling out the big guys in the system integrator space, and it was fascinating how many sort of anonymous or confidential emails I got that said, yeah, I work for Accenture, oh yeah, I work for Deloitte, and you're exactly right, that's exactly what happens. I'm only here for a year or two, and then I'm out, that sort of thing. I thought, wow, so it actually created in a weird way a stronger connection with a lot of the front lines, I would say, a lot of the masses within these big organizations. And I honestly would never have expected that Adam's blog about Microsoft would have created that sort of reaction. So it's just interesting to see how sensitive people get. And I think with Microsoft though, I think they know it was a mistake, and by doing that, and obviously they did think it was a mistake because they backed off of it and changed the date to 2030 or whatever it is now. But the problem is then they were hearing it. People were finding the blog because if you Google Microsoft Great Plains, our blog now shows up very high in the search results. So people are seeing that and they're asking questions like, "What's this about end of life?" And so it's irritating a lot of salespeople. They're trying to close deals, still trying to sell Great Plains, which is a whole nother issue, by the way. I don't know why there are people out there that are still trying to sell Great Plains, even though it's a legacy product that will eventually go away, but that's a whole nother story. So I think that was a big driver, was that people were, it was creating problems for them when they were trying to sell their product. People would find our blog, and I think it was disrupting their sales process. So our job is not here to help anyone sell anything. It's just to sell it like it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I didn't realize that it's not all up to the software vendors. So that was kind of news to me in that piece of it, that you do really have more control than software vendors want you to think that you do have over that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some extreme, even more extreme examples. You have clients that are still using AS400 systems from vendors that don't even exist anymore in some cases, but they still have the software. It's not ideal. It's not, obviously the software is not evolving as quickly as the more current ERP systems, but if you as a business if the software is working and you've got other fish to fry or other priorities as an organization, there's no need for you to necessarily just jump in and rip out your old system and put in a new one. You'll have to eventually, but it may or may not be the right time now. So I think that's the thing that people forget. And you put it well when you said that people have more control than they think. I think vendors overplay their hands quite a bit, but the problem is not enough. A lot of organizations aren't sophisticated enough to call the bluff of these vendors. And so they end up just sort of following along because they think they have no choice. But you're right. You don't need to have the ongoing maintenance. I mean, you could turn off your maintenance on any vendor you have other than cloud solutions, and that is a problem with cloud solutions, by the way. You can't turn off the maintenance or that subscription fee. That's going on forever. But with on-prem, at least, you could turn off your maintenance and support at any time. It just means you're responsible for it and you take on the risk. But that may or may not be the right thing for you.
It was kind of alarming, the scenario that Adam played out, in saying that, again, he heard this from from clients coming to him saying, like, this is what they're telling me I have to do. Like, do I have to do that? And I think that might have caused the piece of disruption, because his recommendation was, no, let's, one, back up, see what's actually happening. And two, you don't have to go from Great Plains to D365. Like, that might be the right choice. But we're going to go through a whole business evaluation before we just say, oh yeah, give me the latest and greatest. And sometimes I wish that was how I wish we had like a business advisor when it came to every sort of upgrade. Like for my iPhone, what if I still wanted an iPhone 1 and now we're on, I don't know, like 18 or something like that. And, it is kind of, I feel like a distrust within the tech industry of like you kind of just get prescribed like what you need to do. And there's no one really there saying, hey, you don't actually have to do any of that. And that was kind of an eye opener again for me.
Yeah, yeah, and he's good at advising clients on the truth behind what their options are, and that's the role that our team plays. Is you have to look at this stuff objectively, and every decision has trade-offs. If you stick with Great Plains or you stick with whatever old legacy system you might be using, yes, there are risks associated with that. Yes, you're not getting the latest and greatest. Yes, you're not in the cloud yet. All that stuff. But at the same time, the good news is you're not taking on the risk of a new implementation. You're also not spending a lot more money on these new technologies. It allows you to focus, on other things. Maybe you're focusing on process improvement or, redesigning your organization to get more efficiencies or whatever it is. I mean, there's always competing priorities, and it's up to us to help clients to figure out what is the right sequence of events. And even though we are a digital transformation consulting firm, there are times where we say, technology is the least of your problems right now. You need to fix your people, your processes, your alignment internally, or whatever the case may be, before you ever even think about transformation. And that's the beauty of not selling software, is we're not tied to software in general or specific vendors either.
How do you manage that relationship? Like, does it ever become awkward? Because I can assume that, like, sometimes, like you said, you're just simply not going to recommend a certain vendor's technology because it's not the right fit for the client. Is there any kind of hard feelings with that vendor before? Or how do you kind of navigate that? It seems like it would be a little bit of a weird relationship.
Yeah, it is weird, and it is difficult to navigate, partly because you're dealing with humans, and when you're dealing with sales reps that have a lot at stake to close this opportunity. For example, you look at it, some of our bigger clients will spend literally tens of millions of dollars on software and services for a transformation. So you look at the commission check that someone's getting for that sale, oftentimes it's seven figures. It'll literally be in the millions of dollars that person can make. And so think of it, I guess you just have to ask yourself, if I had $1 million at stake, not to say that all of us would necessarily be unethical or all of us would necessarily lie, but we're probably going to work pretty hard to make sure we get that deal done. If there's someone like us in our way, that's sort of being objective and sort of calling out the things that maybe you don't necessarily want that prospective customer to hear, you might get a little irritated with it. And so, most of the time our team's pretty good at mitigating and neutralizing the fallout, because everyone's unhappy when they lose, and a lot of times we get accused of being biased. For example, if we evaluated 5 vendors, 4 of them are going to lose, and those 4 oftentimes think we're biased, even though we may have just selected one of them, for the previous client or whatever. So it's almost like a no-win situation sometimes. But I think our team has enough emotional intelligence to be able to navigate those things, and sort of people are starting to recognize that if they look around at all the clients we work with throughout the world, you see such a disparate or such a, not a disparate, but such a variety of different systems that we're recommending and helping implement that there's nothing you can point to that would even suggest or even come close to being biased in their client base. So I think companies are starting to recognize that, but you still get individual personalities that have hurt feelings and hurt pocketbooks because they didn't get the commission they think they were entitled to, and they blame us. So that's okay. It's better us than our clients. That is a part of why clients hire us, because we can take the fall for that sort of stuff.
Crazy, type of scenario to kind of watch and witness. Dramatic, I felt like I was watching like a Bravo episode or so. I think it's a real eye opener to the biases within the industry, and a lot of times what independent consultants can go through to just have their own opinion. But again, showcases the value of really having someone to kind of navigate the situation and decode. And thanks to Adam for sharing his turmoil when it comes to Microsoft Great Plains.
Yeah, that was helpful, and it was really interesting to hear his conversation, and it's a great blog too if you get a chance to check that out on our website, or if you just Google Microsoft Great Plains end of life, you'll find the blog, and that's why Microsoft's so upset. So yeah. Good discussion. But well, thanks, Kyler. That was a good discussion on this and the other topics we had here today. Want to wish everyone that is from the United States listening today happy Thanksgiving. And of course, if you're listening after the fact, I hope you had a Thanksgiving. To those of you throughout the world, I hope you're preparing for happy holidays as we enter the holiday season for much of the world. And look forward to more episodes here as we wrap up the year 2021. Again, every Wednesday you can find new episodes on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the audio podcast platforms. So be sure to subscribe to wherever you watch or listen. Share it with friends and colleagues, anyone who you think might benefit from this content. We'd love to keep getting the word out. So I want to thank everyone for their support of the show and this podcast and helping us spread the show. So thanks very much, everyone. I hope you have a great day, and we will see you all next week on Transformation Ground Control. Take care.